I don't ever feel safe around a man. Doesn't matter who he is, doesn't matter if I know him personally. There's always a part in my brain that goes, this could go bad, because as a child, the one person who is supposed to protect you is your parent. And if that parent is the source of fear and pain, then your brain just gives up almost.
So I give him 5 more. So now get up. Still got a bad attitude. Get up. I'm going to say, you're still crying. I'm going to give you something to cry about.
Hi beautiful people. It is with a heavy heart that I bring you this video. Today I'm presenting a conversation between myself and the daughter of Matt and Lisa Jacobson. Matt Jacobson, known online as Faithful Man, is, according to my guest and faithfulman.com, the mentor of Dale and Veronica Partridge, Issac and Angie Tolpin, and stars of Little People, Big World, Jeremy and Audrey Roloff. Today on God is Great, the adult daughter of the Jacobsons, Stelle, formerly known as Savoury, has come forward to discuss the doctrine which she says led to systemic and, quote, sadistic abuse. First, there are 2 things I'd like to clarify. 1, I have made content about Dale Partridge's questionable, quote, ministry. However, this does not imply that I take delight in making a video like this. I am horrified and heartbroken to learn that Dale's mentor, Matt Jacobson, has supported doctrine which, according to Jacobson's own daughter, has resulted in corporal punishment taken to what she says was the extreme.
The corporal punishment that happened in our home was very extreme. I don't want to go into the more sadistic details, but it was extreme and it was enjoyed as far as I could tell.
If you have fun, it'll be a lot easier training. If he screams too hard with the first 5, gets hysterical, wait. You know, a little psychological terror is sometimes more effective than the pain.
There was never any remorse for the pain itself inflicted. There was never any thought of, I don't want to do this to my child. And I think some families who do use corporal punishment might feel like that, might feel like they have no choice, that this is what the Bible says, and therefore we have to follow through.
Here's the real reason why good parenting is difficult. It's because somebody has to die. All right?
Ouch.
We don't want to die. Our flesh doesn't want to die. We don't want to die to our flesh. And that is really the core. When it comes to parenting, the truth is there are 2 people being trained. The parent's training the child, and God is training the parent.
You are instructed in the scriptures to be raising your children to know the Lord's ways, his commandments, and to teach them diligently, being willing to be strong enough to really be countercultural.
God is counterintuitive. What's intuitive, our gut instinct, often mirrors the world.
Giving grace never means that you don't correct sin.
Yeah.
It never means that. It's actually unloving to let your child sit in their self-depravity and continue on in their sin.
2, this conversation between the Jacobsons' daughter and I is her story. This is not an accusation of physical abuse by any of the aforementioned couples that Matt Jacobson mentors. However, Stelle reiterates that not only does Matt Jacobson promote and teach corporal punishment to those that he mentors.
I do know that my dad does teach this to people he mentors. I've heard it many, many, many times, overhearing him talking to people and him just telling or, writing them and specifically telling how to implement corporal punishment, how much it has to hurt. Basically, the theory, which goes along with Michael Pearl's theory, is if it doesn't hurt enough, if you don't hurt your child enough, they won't repent.
But that the lessons of female submission, unquestioned male authority, and gender hierarchy create a culture that can invite emotional and spiritual manipulation.
God didn't design your heart to be followed. He designed it to be led.
Even if you're not a strong, quote, strong woman, even if you naturally are suited to following someone else, this teaching is still harmful and it's still bad, and just, you don't have to be a Joan of Arc personality for this to harm you. Fundamentally, you're taught to not trust yourself at all from a very young age, not trust your emotions, your feelings, your natural inclinations, your fears, like all of that is considered sin. Love is telling someone else, I want you to be yourself and I want you to be the best version of you. And that is not what this theology produces.
In this video, I will present the conversation between Matt Jacobson's daughter and I, as well as link below resources such as blogs, writings, videos, and podcasts from the couples themselves. These couples may remove these resources upon the release of this video. With that in mind, I've grabbed many screenshots that reiterate the doctrine that Stelle is describing in our conversation. Also, I will not be monetizing this video. In prayer, I knew the wise thing to do would be to forfeit any monetary gain I could receive from this particular video. However, God is Great community, my warrior babes, if this conversation resonates with you, I will link below the podcast version. I will keep that monetized and will donate 100% of the profit from that podcast to a women's shelter in Oregon, where these home churches are centered. You have my word that I will announce what was donated and where your money has gone. So listen to the podcast to support, or if you'd like to make a direct donation to this cause, Venmo at God is Gray and title it with one word: love. Now, this subject is a beast. The best approach, I believe, is to simply give you the information so you can make a determination for yourself. So this is how I came to interview Matt Jacobson's daughter. 1 month ago, I released a video which highlighted Dale's repeated plagiarism, his lack of accreditation from any seminary school, and his blatant, unapologetic misogyny.
This is a lady's responsibility.
In the shadow of his mentor, Matt Jacobson, these statements may seem petty. But to me, the low standards of Dale's so-called ministry, as well as Dale's unethical attitude towards truth and transparency, to me, show a lack of personal character and display cracks in Relearn Church's foundation. Regardless, on the heels of that video, I received an email from Stelle. She had no intention of speaking to me further. She simply wanted to reach out to thank me for exposing what she says was the truth. I didn't know all of these families were connected. I wasn't looking for an expose. I simply read that email, my heart broke for her, and I wanted to reach out and tell her there is healing in her future, that I am here for her if she needs anything. But when we spoke on the phone, she was so eloquent. She was so concise. I was able to confirm that she is who she says that she is. It was impressed upon me to share her story, because if it be true, then there are still women, children, and men suffering under this doctrine of corporal punishment and female submission.
I am a real person. I'm flesh and blood, and I am standing up and saying this is harm, this is evil, and there are real consequences to this kind of teaching and belief and theology.
She looped in her best friend, Sarah Ann, and the three of us talked about this meticulously, carefully over the last 2 weeks. As of just this morning, Stelle's decision to come forward was finalized. She said, quote, "I've been holding my breath since I was a child. Maybe my parents will yell at me for this, but at least I'm breathing."
It's very, very difficult to speak out. It is not an easy thing. It is not pleasant.
I imagine that these couple supporters may come down fiercely and harshly on both myself and Stelle. I imagine their Christian friends might say, if you had an issue with them, you should have gone directly to them. But Matthew 18:15 says, "If your brother or sister sins, go out and point their fault, just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen, even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector." Although I myself have not personally held these people accountable one-on-one, they have been held accountable by Stelle.
We couldn't go to mom and explain to her or say things because, and I definitely did a couple times, and she just would not see it. But yeah, she knew what was happening. Screams are hard to cover up, so she could hear.
That child is going to have authority. Mother, you got to let that man be the authority.
She's made repeated attempts to call out and change what she says is systematic abuse. Stelle's motivation has always been to protect her siblings, 2 of whom, according to her, are still in this household with Matt Jacobson. That said, sharing her story on God is Gray, though not a formal church, is a faith community. Now that all else has failed, we are doing what Matthew 18:17 calls for, which is public accountability. My other reason for coming out and questioning this community publicly is because whenever they are called out, they seem to double down on what others are noticing is harmful doctrine. Like when Dale was accused of being a misogynist.
For it is shameful for a woman to speak in church. Shameful. That's a big word. Let them ask their husbands at home. It was the man that was given the helper. So there is some headship structure.
His recourse was to follow up with podcasts in which he used his wife Veronica to read scripts that further reinforce female submission.
The Lord expects ladies to care for their homes, and he will measure our lives against his word. And as Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commands.
Stelle's mother has ignored her pleas, while female voices like mine are deemed emotional and not as important or trustworthy as the male voices in this community.
I have ladies sometimes that text me and they're just so intense. Like they're just like arguing with me. And I just go, ladies, don't argue with other men.
The second elder of our church literally had a whole sermon about women being liars. He said that sentence and he backed it up with scripture and how women are not to be trusted because of what happened with Eve, which I think is theology Dale still practices to this day.
You ever wondered why the serpent tempted Eve and not Adam? It's because he knew that the woman was more likely to be deceived.
Paul is teaching that the spiritual DNA that was given to women is more likely to be deceived than a man.
Not to mention when I did call out very fact-based elements to Dale Partridge's so-called ministry, he doubled down on that by using the confirmation bias in this video, where he basically says the existence of, quote, haters are just confirmation that he's doing God's work.
It says in 2 Timothy 3:12, indeed, all who desire to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. If you're not receiving some type of resistance, it's likely that you're not living a godly life.
It actually like boosted my faith.
So women cannot hold men accountable in any way. If you have a problem with your husband, you have to go to him privately and respectfully.
And if you have a problem with another man, you have to have your husband talk to that man for you.
If you have an issue with something another man says, talk to your husband about it.
Stelle, Sarah Ann, and I did not see a path to protect these children by doing it quietly. She said, quote, if I had thought shutting up would protect my siblings, I would have shut up forever. That's why I've been silent for so long. I just wanted them to be okay. I would also like to point out that Stelle's boundaries have been repeatedly violated by her parents.
You know, we see a moment of bad behavior. We see a moment of defiance. We see a moment of a child pulling away and scrunching up their body to kind of angle away and everything getting tight and pulling back. So you're going to have to decisively come in. You're going to have to retrain that child that this is not okay. You never, ever pull away from daddy. You never, ever pull away from mommy.
Not only was she betrothed to be married at 15 and 17 by her father.
The way it would work was the man would approach the father and ask him if he could court the girl. And that was all part of like the purity culture, and the dad would accept. You would say yes, because like a chance at marriage was a chance that you had to take, because that was your calling, that was your only sense of worth in life. I cried in both circumstances. My happiness obviously is not considered.
Colossians 3:18, why submit to your own husbands as is fitting in the Lord.
As is fitting in the Lord. And it's going to be easier for your daughters to be walking in that biblical role if they start young.
Yeah. But also, she's repeatedly asked her parents to cease promoting their products using her image. They're currently promoting books titled 100 Ways to Love Your Daughter and 100 Ways to Love Your Son, where Stelle is notably absent.
I was not told that they were writing these books. I have not read these books. I have no interest in reading them. It's quite crazy to me that is now out in the world. So yeah.
However, they posted against her will in the recent past, even cropping off half her face, as though that would somehow respect her wishes. Again, I am thoroughly overwhelmed by all the research I've done. So I will leave you with the resources below and this raw conversation between Stelle and myself. And if this community lashes out, Stelle and I are prepared to share the resources that we have.
Growing up, every movie, every book, every person I hung out with was vetted. It was all, they were all allowed to only be in the group, no sleepovers. no contact to the outside world. Parents went with us everywhere. So there was never a chance of having any sort of idea that there was something different.
Whatever they are learning, it is, by definition, indoctrination. I personally would like to be the one doing that. And I don't want my kids being influenced or raised by those people.
The government's evil.
And whatever rights we don't use will be taken away from us. So I'm homeschooling and using that right now, hoping that my children will have that right one day.
You know, no book compares to the Bible. And who's translating the Bible for you? Your father, the man.
You know, my seminary school is learning from you and reading the Bible.
Anybody outside of us is bad. And not only are we good, but we're right.
The minute they get out of school, you're picking them up and you are discipling them and you are detoxing them off of any crud that is contradictory to what you believe. And by the way, I don't know if you've ever been in a 6th grade or 9th grade or 8th grade or 7th grade class for very long, but I don't want my kids becoming like those other kids. I'm just going to be honest. I don't want them socialized to them. Sorry. I want them socialized to me because I want to like them when they're older. I do. That's it. It's selfish.
You will find these resources reiterate everything Stelle has said, up to and including the PVC piping and measurement recommended by Michael and Debbie Pearl's book, To Train Up a Child, a book that Stelle says was accessible and used in her home.
You talked about having like a plumbing supply line in every room of the house.
My dad believed in using an empty, hollow, white switch tube thing. It's a plumbing tube, basically, and we had 6 or 7 in our house. They were stored in a closet because the hand is not enough. It does not inflict enough.
In fact, the DA says this is the exact same plumbing supply line that was used in the Lydia Schatz case.
This book was also found in the homes of and believed to be directly responsible for the murder of 3 children in 3 different cities. According to Stelle, Matt has owned, implemented, and passed down the teachings of this book. Here are Matt's own words on training your child from his and Lisa's Faithful Life podcast, titled How to Love Your Kids, Do the Hard Work of Training, which accompanies the article, What Are You Tolerating from Your Toddler? Why Wise Parents Persevere in Training. So one thing I did notice is that in Mike and Debbie Pearl's book, they call children Nazis. They say, don't let your children become little Nazis. So your dad chooses to use the word tyrant instead.
But hey, he was a little dictator and had his little pouty lips, and he ruled. He kind of walked around the room with a certain rat-like cunning. Fact is tyrants come in all shapes and sizes. Some of the cutest tyrants in the world are about 2 feet tall. The real tragedy of these little Tin Pot tyrants that terrorize Christian homes all across America, they're not born. They're made. We call it behavior. Johnny's acting out. But there's another name for this. It's sin. So defying a parent to his face isn't just a result of being a young child or being tired, bored, insecure, hungry, or off, or whatever adjective we use to smooth over how our children or a child happens to be embarrassing us in the moment, right? Because that's a lot of the motivation of addressing these things, right? I'm uncomfortable in public because of what my child is doing. Rebellion against parental authority, oversight, and training is sin.
From here, I will share my conversation with Stelle. I want her words to speak for themselves. Again, go to the God is Great podcast by following the link below if you'd like 100% of profits donated to a women's shelter in Oregon. And again, if you have a direct donation you'd like sent to the women's shelter, please go to Venmo @GodIsGray and add the note love. Or continue to listen here for free. Next week, I'll be sharing my conversation with W.M. Paul Young, the author of The Shack and Eve. He and I speak of the corporal punishment we suffered as children and the pain we all, regardless of sex, suffer under misogyny and female submission. If you do care to support this channel, you can become a patron at patreon.com/GodIsGray. And now my conversation with Stelle. Hi, beautiful people. Today is definitely the most sensitive conversation I've ever had with anyone. And I appreciate your kindness and love and humility in which you listen to this interview, even if you've come to listen to it, to hate on us, to doubt what my guest is saying about her father and her family. So either way, I just thank you for coming in with a spirit of humility if possible. We don't know what goes on in people's hearts, souls, or homes if we're not in it. So this is just a conversation between 2 women that is going to be honest. Take it or leave it. Hi, Stelle.
Hi.
Stelle and I have been in communication for 2 weeks now.
Yeah, I think so, about that, yeah.
Almost every day. And she wanted to share, wanted isn't exactly the word. Feeling an imperative to share the things that she is going to share today. And this is all about Matt and Lisa Jacobson, aka The Faithful Man and Club 31 Women. Her parents are authors. They talk about 100 ways to love your daughter, 100 ways to love your son. And that is even something that's emboldened both of us even more to call out the BS that we've seen and the BS that she's experienced. And we're going to talk today about corporal punishment, what that actually looks like. We're going to talk about female submission, what it looks like in theory when you see it in pretty Instagram photos versus what it actually is to live that life. We're both going to come at this with as much love as possible, but also no holds barred, just tell the truth and say it like it is. So I don't even know where to begin. It's so overwhelming. Do you know where you'd like to begin?
Yeah, it's quite a big topic. I would say that I, confirm and echo everything that you were saying. As far as I just want to preface this entire conversation in that it's very easy maybe for someone looking from the outside to make hasty judgments or to say that someone might not understand what they're talking about. And I just want to assure everyone listening that I have lived all of these experiences and that what I say is not, it's not a story. And I would appreciate if people honored that in whatever way that they could. And I would like to talk about this because if you grow up in the environment that we're going to cover, and in the culture that we're gonna cover, it's very, very difficult to speak out. It is not an easy thing. It is not pleasant. And I just want to confirm to anyone who or will have a doubt that Brenda has taken so much time and care in this conversation, and that there was a lot of hesitancy on my part because there are a lot of things at play in this discussion. So this is not a simple thing. There's a lot of people involved, and I personally feel like I need to talk about it because, like I said, I have lived it, and I have seen the effects both personally, obviously, and then just on other people. And I would just like to call out some of the horrific effects of bad theology and where this stuff leads. I think it's very easy to talk about stuff as in a context of it not affecting real people, and this theology and this teaching affects very real people who have to spend their whole life trying to recover from it. So my goal in this is to prevent some of that. If someone listens to this and feels validated in their concerns or their hesitancy about what is going on or what they're being told for how they have to live, I just want to be a voice that is very qualified to speak on this subject, and just encourage people to maybe look at it in terms of there are different ways to live life other than what is being taught in this group. So
yeah, I think it's worth just giving a bit of backstory for how we got here, and that is that I would argue that I tested the spirit. I intuited that something dark was going on with Dale Partridge. He's bothered me, and his theology has rubbed me the wrong way for a long time, but arguably a lot of people's theology rubs me the wrong way, and I can see it leading to hurt. But there was something about him that felt very opportunistic, very entrepreneurial. I didn't feel it was authentic. And then when I researched it more, found out about his plagiarism and things like that, it just became clear that what I was intuiting was correct. And I didn't ever think about taking it any further than there. I thought, okay, this man is probably subjugating his wife, probably telling his daughter how to be submissive, regardless of how big her personality may be. Like, I can see him following these teachings and also becoming more and more of an extremist. The more he would post about, oh, now I'm learning the original Greek, and now, I have this great authority on the Bible that no one else has, and I'm going to charge people $4,000 to get in line with what I'm learning that is superior to what everybody else reads in the Bible. Like, him propping himself up seemed dangerous, is dangerous, but at the same time I was like, well, whatever, his family will survive, will be fine, like, they're making their own choices. However, I received many emails. I received one from like a former, I don't want to call her out, but a former someone that used to work for Dale, that said she suffered a lot and she needed therapy to recover just from what he taught her about being a female and her worth. And it had seeped in enough that she really lost a sense of self that she had to recover after no longer being in that world. And then the most disturbing email I received was from Stelle. And just so everyone knows, there was absolutely no request to speak to me, and definitely no request to say anything publicly. Email was just like, I want to thank you so much for calling out what you perceive to be true. I want to validate that everything you said is true. And furthermore, my father took corporal punishment to the extreme. He was incredibly abusive to me and my siblings, and I just want to thank you for speaking out about this world. But it was like highlighted to me in bold in my spirit. I opened it, I reached back out to her, and I just wanted to offer my compassion and conversation because I was just led to do so. Stella and I got on the phone. We had a beautiful private conversation where she just really laid her heart out and told me so many things that had happened. And I felt very hesitant to ask her to speak publicly about this because it was so sensitive, so dark, so difficult. So like we've both said, it's taken us 2 weeks to get to this point where we've decided to sit down together and share this conversation publicly. Everything was done with so much care on Stelle's end. And how this is all related is that her father, Matt Jacobson, is Dale Partridge's mentor. That is very open. You can go to their website right now and you will see Dale Partridge promoting Matt Jacobson. You will see Issac and Angie Tolpin. You will see, what's that couple from TLC?
Oh, Audrey and Jeremy Roloff.
Yeah. So they have like couples, and then there's Jennifer and what's his name, Smith?
Yeah, Jennifer and Aaron Smith. Yeah.
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 So this is a community of home churches. They all have their glossy Instagrams, and they're all growing in popularity and notoriety, and their messages may be watered down to a truly loving family somewhere in Nebraska, might not cause too much harm, but I would, and I will argue that it will cause harm regardless. These messages about female submission, who's worthy, this hierarchy that's placed on families, is harmful at its root. It's got root rot. The whole theology is messed up. It's, to me, an inversion of the Bible, an inversion of God's love. But then when we take it there and we see what's going on up north, there's a cult-like community being built, and it's being built by men that have this tyrannical attitude, including Dale himself, saying that everyone has to fall in line with his specific theology or they're not welcome in the community. So all of that is prefaced to say this is how intertwined everyone is, and this is the community of people we are looking at and talking about right now. I personally am not saying that anyone else is using corporal punishment to this extreme on their children, but Stella's just going to tell you what her father teaches and what he mentors when he is mentoring. And I will just tell you as a fact-based truth that these are the people that outwardly say, this man has mentored me.
So, corporal punishment is definitely not talked about as publicly on any of these platforms, but it is a very strong tenet of my father's teaching, both in private practice and for who he mentors. And I'm not sure where he got this idea from. I believe that he was raised in, I don't like this term because I think it's a cop-out, but like an old school type family situation where, you know, beating your kids was normal or was looked on as fine and acceptable. And then he also became involved with and taught Michael Pearl's How to Train Up Your Child. He obviously read that book and implemented a lot of stuff that is in there. And yeah, the corporal punishment that happened in our home was very extreme. There was definitely it did not come from a place of love. And looking back on it, I never saw a sense of regret that pain was being inflicted. That just did not happen. I don't pretend to understand the psychological reasons for that, because I'm not a parent, I'm not a mother, so I don't know if I'm qualified to speak on that element. But there was never a spirit of, I don't want to do this to you, but I feel like I have to. And I think some families who do use corporal punishment might feel like that, might feel like they have no choice, that this is what the Bible says and therefore we have to follow through. Definitely from my experience, it was, I would say, just more darker than that. I don't think it was inflicted with I don't feel like I have another choice. It was looked upon as the right way. It was looked upon as something that God smiled on, that God liked. And obviously it was used to dominate completely the children, because there was never a chance for us to speak out, speak against, have a say in what was happening as far as discipline went. And definitely in terms of like a legal sense or any kind of, you know, social work sense, it was way over the line, 110% into an abuse category. There's no doubt about that element. It was into an abusive category completely. And I do know that my dad does teach this to people he mentors. I've heard it many, many, many times, overhearing him talking to people and him just telling, or, you know, writing them and specifically telling how to implement corporal punishment, how much it has to hurt, and how if you don't, basically the theory which goes along with Michael Pearl's theory is if it doesn't hurt enough, if you don't hurt your child enough, they won't repent. And my experience as a child was that I was a very tender-hearted child, and so even if I felt like someone was mad at me, that was enough. And so there was lots of, you know, feeling sick to my stomach, and it created a feeling that I was never safe, and that I was constantly walking on eggshells, and that at any moment someone who was much bigger than me could do whatever they wanted and there would be nobody to help me. And yeah, it was a common, regular part of our home. There was a lot of unfair type punishments as well, where, for instance, like if my dad couldn't locate something in the house and he thought someone had misplaced it, he would line us all up and be like, well, who did this? And of course, being little kids, either you can't remember, or the stress of that situation, knowing what's about to happen, is completely overwhelming. And so then we'd all get punished, you know, or someone would just take the blame to avoid punishment for the rest of us. I don't want to go into the more sadistic details, but it was extreme and it was enjoyed, as far as I could tell. There was never any remorse for the pain itself inflicted. There was never any thought of, I don't want to do this to my child. And again, I don't pretend to understand the psychological reasons for that. I think it's generational. I think it's learned. But I also think any parent or parent-to-be that feels like they have no choice, you do have a choice. in how you touch your child and how you take care of them. And it is not necessary to use that type of force on your child. And I would say it is 100% evil. And if you have ever inflicted something like that, I think it's a cycle. And I think even if you feel bad, you have to just pull back and stop and evaluate what's going on. And for me, I felt like that whole thing started probably when my dad was young and when he was experiencing same treatment, and it begins a cycle. And then in order to not feel bad, you have to just convince yourself you're so right in doing it. And then it just gets worse and worse because there's no cap on the limit. And we were disciplined and had physical and mental repercussions from that. And it's something that I've had a really hard time working through. I don't ever feel safe around a man. Doesn't matter who he is, doesn't matter if I know him personally. There's always a part in my brain that goes, this could go bad, and I will have no recourse. I'll have nothing to be able to prevent something bad from happening to me. And I know that corporal punishment was a direct result of that, because as a child, the one person who is supposed to protect you is your parent. And if that parent is the source of fear and pain, then your brain just gives up almost. And so that's still a part of my psyche that's very broken. And maybe one day it will be fixed, but for now, it is the way it is.
Yeah, so I wanted to address the idea of this like generational passed down behavior, and I just want to come alongside Stelle, and I've been given permission by my own father, who has repented for his behavior. My dad used to cry every single Christmas and ask us all, there's 4 of us, if he was a good father. And you know, I myself spent so many years protecting my dad, because you have this weird sense of like, I mean, they're your parent. You have this weird sense of needing to protect them. And I think even as a child, you can intuit when a parent is doing something very wrong. And even that, for me, I don't know if you feel the same way, made me want to protect him. Like I didn't want to know anyone to know that he was a bad person or that he was doing something so bad. But generationally, he was beaten with a cat of 9 tails, which is like 9 belts wrapped together. And then the next generation, my older brother and sister, had just 1 belt. And then me and my brother got an open hand. And then me and my brother will be the very first generation to stop corporal punishment altogether. So it can be stopped, this cycle. And, you know, I obviously intend to do that. But like you said, that's not an excuse for behavior at all. And I do want to talk about some of your dad's specific posts and just the fear that comes in when you don't know what your quote sin might be. Like that the word sin even is so subjective. And in this community, the things they teach to be sin are when a girl is too boisterous and loud, when she's not allowing herself to be, quote, led by a man, if you are not being, you know, as feminine or as masculine as you're supposed to be. So one thing I did notice is that in Mike and Debbie Pearl's book, they call children Nazis. They say, don't let your children become little Nazis. So your dad chooses to use the word tyrant instead. He says, tyrants come in all shapes and sizes, but some of the cutest tyrants in the world are 2 feet tall. What are you tolerating from your toddler? We call it, quote, behavior, but it has another name, sin. Defying a parent to his face isn't just a result of being tired, bored, insecure, hungry, off, or whatever adjective you use to smooth over how our child happens to be embarrassing us in the moment. It's sin. Rebellion against parental authority, oversight, and training is sin. God loves us, and because of that, he won't tolerate defiance and rebellion in his children, and he calls parents everywhere to not tolerate them in their toddlers. Next time we're tempted to choose comfort or convenience, in parentheses, our flesh, over dealing with a defiant moment in our child's heart, let's remember God's perspective on the matter. Quote, rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. 1 Samuel 15:23. And Stelle, I've talked to you so much about how your dad does have this brilliance where he has covered his tracks quite well all over his website. He has so many posts that are just recycled old posts from other authors from the 90s talking about how to love your children. But to me, this post shows so much of himself, and I'd love to hear what you receive from it. But like, for me, the word tyrant is insane to me. Conflating insecurity with sin, to me, implies that a boy crying could get hurt, or like, you know, like that leaves so much room. If you're saying insecurity is a sin, what does that even mean?
Yeah, like I said in the very beginning, like the words that he is talking about and saying and what I'm saying are not, you know, they're not embellished. Like he does mean what he's writing. And I mean, one of the very many examples, which I will not go into too detail because I will protect, you know, the identity of siblings and everything. But there was a child who was potty training in our house, and as is normal. And, you know, they had an accident. And then my dad's response to that was to lay that person on the couch and beat them. And I remember my older brother walking by and just being so horrified, like, so, it was so evil.
What age is this?
That was, I mean, the person who was getting punished was probably 2, 3, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Young, very young. And there's so many stories. I want to not, I don't think it's necessary to
like to dwell on the details. Yeah,
to too many of them. But when I say that, yeah, I don't think my dad knows how to go easy. I will say that.
Well, the thing too in this post that really freaks me out, and this is why I am outwardly and openly going to be calling out this entire community, because your dad is saying we're tempted to choose comfort or convenience, our flesh, over dealing with a defiant child. What that says to me is the people that he's mentoring, he's saying, you might not want to do this. You might not want to impose this kind of punishment on your children. And that is your flesh telling you. And this is why I put effort into last week's video to say Christians manipulate people and destroy people from the inside out by saying your flesh is evil, your heart is deceitful. I can argue the theology all around if you all want me to, in argument to me, if you want to tell me those things are true. They're not. Those are ways that people have manipulated us to tell us not to trust our bodies, to tell us not to trust what we are intuiting to be accurate and true. So your dad, in saying that to the people he's mentoring, is saying your body, yourself, your intuition is going to fight this, because guess what? It is so wrong, and people are going to sense that it's wrong. And your dad's saying, but that's your flesh. That's your sin. You have to go out there and deal with the witchcraft, the rebellion, the sin of your insecure, tired, bored, hungry, off child. And let's talk about how your dad passed an instrument of abuse onto a family that just adopted a child.
Yeah, so my parents, mostly my dad, I would say predominantly my dad, believed in using an empty, hollow, white switch tube thing. It's a plumbing tube, basically, and we had, 6 or 7 in our house. They were stored in a closet. And there was a family, lifelong friends that we had known who had adopted a person, and that person was acting out as is normal with an adoption process. They were not adopted as a child, and they had a difficult background. And my dad had counseled them, you need to use corporal punishment, and you need to use this instrument because that's what effectively, hurts enough. And my dad used belts and other things sometimes, but it was usually that particular plumbing device. And he passed that on to them, and like I have said, just openly counsels for corporate punishment no matter what you're using as an instrument, but instruments are encouraged because the hand is not enough. It does not inflict enough. So, and this tube would like 100% leave bruises. Like it was pretty intense.
Well, with that too, you were saying that there's this vilification, this us versus them mentality. And I'm going to call the Tolpins out for this one. I see Angie Tolpin talking a lot about how you have to homeschool because the rest of the world is evil. Everyone else is in their flesh. The world, quote, culture, quote, they're all out to get you. So you have this community of people that are becoming all insular with one another. And they're all reverberating these same toxic teachings off of one another. And then you have someone like Angie openly professing over and over again that everyone else on the outside is evil and out to get you. So when you have that kind of encouragement, I guess, basically, and also giving the children no recourse, that means like a child might not feel comfortable to reach out to their secular soccer coach and say, hey, my dad's beating the crap out of me, and also like you lose a sense of normalcy, right, Stelle? Like, how do you even know when you're in this community what the hell is normal and what is actually this extreme?
You don't know. There's no chance. Like everything growing up, every movie, every book, every person I hung out with was vetted. It was all, they were all allowed to only be in the group. No sleepovers, no contact to the outside world. Parents went with us everywhere. So there was never a chance of having any sort of idea that there was something different. And I remember going over to my friend's house and she got into like a yelling match with her dad. And my panic set in and I'm like, we have to get out of here. Because to me, if I ever did that to my dad, like, yeah, it was just, it would have been, I wouldn't have survived. That was one thing my dad made sure we understood. Like, if we crossed him, he would not hold back. And that was always a very, very, very present thing from the time I was little to the time I left when I was 17. And yeah, there's no way to understand what's normal and what's not normal. Even after I had left, for a couple years after, I hadn't started therapy. And only then, when my therapist was like, hey, this is not normal. Like, dads don't normally beat their children as a punishment, and this is not normal. And obviously I went into more details with certain things that had happened. And she was the first one to be, and this was recent. It was not, like 15 years ago. So,
yeah.
And that was the first time I had ever looked at it and been like, wow, this is really abnormal. There is no chance if you are in this group that you have any idea that what you're being taught, whether it's, women being, subjugated, whether it's purity culture, whether it's corporal punishment, you have no idea that these things are not normal. Right. And my therapist was the first one to say that. And it was kind of life-changing, because the government's evil, no book compares to the Bible. And who's translating the Bible for you? Your father, the man. There's no independence. There's no looking at things from your own angle or from your own sense of truth. It is completely vetted. Every piece of information or truth that you receive is vetted and is handed to you. And it's like, if you don't believe this, then you're going to hell. And
they're very open about that. I can pull a clip right now of Veronica saying, I don't need a theology teacher. I don't need seminary. I have Dale. And they really prop themselves up as these tyrannical, infallible teachers. And the other problem is too, them conflating, they vilify emotions all the time. They're saying, you're emotional. You don't know what you're talking about. Your heart is deceitful. Meanwhile, these men can be as emotional as they want to, because they are saying, my voice is the voice of God. They're saying, I'm receiving messages directly from the Creator, and He is telling me how to behave. And you need to fall in line with that, because there's a very clear hierarchy. And when you listen to, again, Angie Tolpin brings her daughter on, and they've created a hierarchy in the home where first, above all, is Isaac. And supposedly Isaac is the direct communication to God, and he always knows what's going on. And then you have Angie, and then you have the sons, and then you have the daughters. And it's said explicitly because she commends her daughter for bowing down and being subjugated to her younger brothers while they're doing chores. And they're saying, you know, this is a positive thing because they're falling into this hierarchy that is supposedly biblical. And on the point of the government being bad, anyone listening, can you not see where this leads? This means that who are you supposed to trust outside of your community if you are being hurt, if you're being abused physically, emotionally, sexually? You have no recourse because everyone outside of this is evil and of the world. And also in what's it called? The Pearl's book, Michael and Debbie Pearl, they talk about how to hide from the government. They talk about how to train your children to say the right things when Child Protective Services comes, and to hit your children in specific places where they're in public, they won't be seen. Was that happening in your household as well?
Yeah, I mean, there was a definite fear, very specific fear instilled for any sort of government intervention. At one point, our home fellowship was going to move to Idaho and build, a compound basically to live together. We went to Idaho, we looked at properties. That happened, that was real. So yeah, there's a lot of like pretty basic cult elements happening where it's like anybody outside of us is bad, and not only are we good, but we're right, and we have all knowledge, we have all sense of truth, and everyone else is bad. And even things like, oh, if you go to public school, or and again, some of the teachings have relaxed a bit, but it always leads back to the same place. And this is something I've noticed when listening to these people. They go, well, like, it's okay that your kid is in public school, but, and then they give a bunch of reasons and basically lead you back to the same conclusion. And the same thing happens with submission. Like, we're not horrible people for being the ones who call the last shots in our marriage. We give our wives a chance to say something, but at the end of the day, it's the man that has the power. It's the man that literally calls the shots. So to me, that's a cop-out. That is a straw man reassurance, saying like, oh, so, but yes, we were taught that the government is not good. I don't know specific, because we were isolated. We lived out kind of in the middle of nowhere. We went to a home church and we were homeschooled. So we weren't in a city. We didn't live in a city where we would have more access. We didn't attend school where people would see or know. And then everyone within that group is being led by my father. So there was obviously not going to be someone who stepped out and was like, hey, and I do want to say also, for anyone listening, just because a parent or yourself did not experience corporal punishment or severe corporal punishment does not mean that this teaching is abuse, because mentally it is abuse on its own standing. This idea that your dad represents God on earth and that he has total authority over you. I don't care how young someone is, they are independent and they are loved and beloved, and they have no obligation to the person who brought them into this world to meet their needs and desires. And I just think I just think that whole thing is so toxic that you have to completely submit to your quote authority figure when they could be someone who's not good. And that's a whole nother topic.
No, I know. I mean, let's go down that rabbit trail, because one thing I can see happening is that someone like Angie, Isaac, Dale, Veronica will get to be like, oh, well, now we're going to separate ourselves from the Jacobsons because they've been outed as an abusive couple outright. But one of my main points is exactly what you're saying. The physical harm is a story on its own. It is incredibly, deeply harmful. But as someone that was a victim of corporal punishment, I would say that I don't remember being physically hurt. Like, the memory, I was physically hurt, but the memory of the physical moment is not what stands out. What stands out is the humiliation that surrounded it and the message that I received, which was that, you know, you're not safe in your own home. And also this list of sins that's subjective to what your father perceives to be a sin. And this is where I would call out the potentially lesser, you know, terrible couples of this group, being Dale, Veronica, Angie, and Issac, and say, no, what you are doing is also abusive mentally and emotionally. You're telling your little girls, like, they're very openly training them up for marriage. They're training them up to be submissive to a man. And they have all their flowery language. They have their Instagram filters to make it look okay, but it's not okay. And the reason is because, I mean, there's so many reasons, but women should never be subjugated to the authority of just human beings. And they're sending them out into the world to be those people. And the women themselves, I wouldn't doubt, or I think everyone is suffering under this culture. I don't think anyone is not suffering. The men are insecure and they're suffering. They're getting their own feedback loop of encouragement to keep living in their, what I call, genuine sin of subjugating their families. Their wives are suffering. You know, they all have this imperative to have 1 million babies and never stop, whether or not they want to. All of the wives write, you know, Dale will write posts and being like, Veronica isn't naturally, you know, submissive. She doesn't naturally want to stay home with the kids all day, but like, she's a good woman, so she does what she needs to do. That's abusive. How can you tell me that's not abusing someone and subjugating them to you because God says it's like, okay?
I think my perspective on these things is very simplistic in terms of, like, if you're telling someone that they have to change the core of who they are to please God, that makes no sense to me, because God made you the core of who you are. How is that logically sound? If God made a woman who is strong and brave and has ideas and has a role and a place in the world to go enact, like, if they're born in, and I am one of those people. I was born into my body being a strong person who has a need to be independent, has a need to make my own way. That's not something I've set out to decide. It's like, I'm here, this is me. I was like that as a little child. And you're telling me that God made something, but then it's not perfect. How dare you say that? How dare you say that God made someone and then now wants them to fundamentally change who they are to please him? That makes no sense to me. I don't, like, that argument is illogical on its basis.
And they're basing it on a couple clobber passages written in Paul's letters that are taken out of context. My true belief is that Paul would be horrified if he could see the way his words have been twisted and perverted to harm women, children, LGBTQ people. But I know by the way all of these people talk that if a girl is loud and boisterous, that is immediately rebellion. And then you take it to its logical conclusion of what your dad says. What's rebellion? Sin. What is sin? Witchcraft. You know, like, these messages that these little girls are getting about the way that they're made and that they're made wrong is what, to me, is so abusive. And their wives are getting the same messages too. Go ahead.
I wanted to bring up real quick. So I haven't really paid attention to this world for quite some time. I also wanted to mention that so people don't think I've been lying in wait to bring up these things. I really have lived my own life. I really have a happy life right now. And this only came up because I happened to see Brenda's video on Dale, and I know him personally. I'm very aware of who he was, and so that's what kind of brought all this stuff up. But as far as, you know, women being submissive, even if you're not a strong, quote, strong woman, even if you naturally are suited to following someone else, this teaching is still harmful and it's still bad. And just, you don't have to be a Joan of Arc personality for this to harm you. And love is telling someone else, I want you to be yourself, and I want you to be the best version of you. And that is not what this theology produces. It fits people into horrible boxes where the man is forced to have all the responsibility of financially, spiritually, and every way else leading a family, usually of, anywhere from 3-4 kids to like 10, 11, 12, 16 kids. And basically he's responsible for all those souls, which again is God's role. That's usurping God's role. And the pressure and the anxiety that causes men who are not, quote, naturally born to lead, who don't have an interest in it, is very, very detrimental. And there were more than a few men who came into my dad's church who were like, I actually like married my wife because I like that she has an opinion and she knows what she likes. She knows what she wants. And that's comforting to me as a man. I like it naturally as a man to rely on her and lean on her. And my dad would go, no. See, this dynamic is all wrong. The woman has to completely change who she is, calm herself down, hush herself into silence, and then the man has a chance to realize his potential. God wants a man to come forward in every case, in every scenario. And that just doesn't go over well for everyone. And I think this theology separates humanity, and it separates people from being in touch with their true selves. And if there is a man who he's called to gently support the flame in his life, then there is nothing evil or wrong about that. And saying that he has to suddenly become someone who he's not to make God happy is the definition of insanity. I was listening to a podcast of a young couple who I also grew up with, who also attended the church and who were also mentored by my parents. And she was saying like, oh, I'm really entrepreneurial and I really have, like a sense of business, which is true. And they were talking about how in order for her to be happy in their marriage, and the reason why their marriage ran into problems is because she was too knowledgeable. So she would stand up to her husband and be like, hey, like, this doesn't seem like a wise financial decision. And so their conclusion, and they use this word, their conclusion was, in order for them to be happy and follow God, she needed to be more ignorant. And they used that word multiple times in that podcast. And she's like, now that I'm more ignorant of what's going on with our family business, our marriage is better. And that is so crazy. That is that idea, which is everywhere in all of these teachings, all of these groups and couples, that, I don't know if it's theology, but that idea is everywhere, that the woman has to be quiet and dumb. And then if she speaks up, even if it's a good idea, even if it's a right idea, God would rather have her be silent than say that and say those things that she knows. And there's a lot of things we're talking about. There's evil things but this is like, that's just crazy. Like, that's just a crazy idea on every level, on every way that you look at it, that this young wife is practicing ignorance in order to make God happy.
And let's talk about silence, because now I'm remembering, I pointed out in my original Dale video where Veronica said this as like a fun, great story, which really just shows her confirmation bias in this situation, where her friend felt in the spirit she had a word from God divinely, and the happy moment was that she was submissive. She stayed silent as God would call her to do. And Dale said exactly what she was thinking. And she was like, see, I was obedient and the message was received anyway, because God, and they ended it by saying something like, see, God uses men. And like, it's a fun story. My mom is so gentle and so willing to forgive so many different kinds of people. And that to her was the red flag that sent her tipping over the edge. She was like, wait, I think this is darkness. Like, what is that? So I want, I think by the time this Instagram ministry that all of them have gets watered down to the public, a lot of people are like, well, surely it's not that literal. surely women can at least pray, or at least have some sort of say in what's happening in these meetings. Like, they're having these church communities where obviously only men are allowed to attend the Bible school, right? This unaccredited Bible school that Dale has made without any accreditation himself. Only men welcome, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's no, so women cannot hold men accountable in any way.
Wait, is this in the meeting or in their marriage? Accountability? Because that's not biblical at all. You're always supposed to be held accountable.
I would say both. So what's taught in the home fellowship is, if you have a problem with your husband, you have to go to him privately and respectfully.
And if you have a problem with another man, you have to have your husband talk to that man for you, which
100%.
Again, Veronica says.
100%. Yeah, that is absolutely practice. When I was growing up in that home fellowship, like, which I think is still practiced as far as I know, but women were not allowed to speak in the meeting. Men were the ones to, brought up things. The only thing that women were allowed to do was they would sometimes bring up prayer requests, but men were the only ones who were allowed to pray. After the service was over, which this is a home church, so there's not that many people, the men and women sat in different places. So they just kind of separate and go to their different places. And yeah, the women being silent thing is not a hypothetical in the church. Women were not allowed to teach, not allowed to pray out loud. You could pray quietly, I guess. I'm not sure how that's different, but yeah, just as far as, and then any sort of confrontation or any sort of like, hey, I'm concerned that this person just said something crazy. Yeah, you have to go to your husband and convince him to go to the person. There was the second elder of our church, literally had a whole sermon about women being liars. He said that sentence and he backed it up with scripture and how women are not to be trusted because of what happened with Eve, and all that fun stuff, which I think is theology Dale still practices to this day.
Yeah, I have a clip of him saying, why did the serpent come to Eve? Because she was more likely to be deceived.
Yeah, so there was literal teachings that happened in the church where women were focused on in terms of how untrustworthy we were and how we, like, God basically created men as a safety net for us. So we would not mess up, or we would not lead them to sin, because men have more of a direct access to God. And the quieter women are, the better it is for everyone.
I mean, this is the thing. It's like, we can say, oh, who's this girl? Talking to God is gray. She's making this stuff up. You can confirm literally every single word out of your mouth by a cursory view of any of these people's blogs. It's written out pretty explicitly, the way that they see it. I just don't think people realize how quickly that leads into such deep darkness and what it does to people psychologically.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, you're taught to not trust yourself at all from a very young age, not trust your emotions, your feelings, your natural inclinations, your fears, like all of that is considered sin. And so by the time you get married, which I was, I courted 2 people when I was very young. I should not have been allowed to do that. And the way it would work was the man would approach the father and ask him if he could court the girl. And that was all part of like the purity culture, and the dad would accept, usually the dad would say like, is this acceptable? But because you're so programmed that this is the only way, my only purpose in life is to have children, you would say yes, because like a chance at marriage was a chance that you had to take, because that was your calling, that was your only sense of worth in life. And
so the first one, how old? So you were 15, right, when this first happened? Like, how did this scenario look?
I was barely 15 when the first time happened, and it was a man or a boy from our group, and yeah, we were friends and stuff. And he had asked my dad, and the second time I was around 17, I believe. But yeah, and women would get married in this group extremely young. Like, they would literally turn the legal age and get married. We went to a wedding where the girl got married on her 16th birthday because the state where it was happening, that was the legal age. So she was like 15 in a day, and she married someone who was significantly older than her. But yeah, and again, it was perceived as normal because the only worth a woman had was her ability to bear children.
Yeah, and I just want to ask you, so when your father basically comes to you and it's you know, under this guise of like, oh, you have a choice, or I'm asking you, but like you're saying, all of this programming leads you to believe there actually is no is not an option, or even that, oh, okay, this is the right decision because this is what I'm meant to do. But like, were you getting any sense in your body, in your own heart, God forbid, that evil thing, that this wasn't right? Did it feel okay? Like, how did it feel to be betrothed to someone at 15?
Oh, I mean, I cried in both relationship. Well, I will not call it a relationship. I cried in both circumstances. It was very upsetting for me, and there was no sense of my dad. The whole thing is crazy. The whole thing that you would give your barely 15-year-old over to someone to court with it was always with the intent of marriage. It was always we were going to get married. That was always very clear. It was not like it was not a normal 15-year-old relationship where, you know, you are just experimenting, you don't know. It was like, I'm going to marry this person. So it was a very formal process. And usually people only courted one person and then got married. It was very rare that there were like multiple breakups. But yeah, like my happiness obviously is not considered, other than, you know, is this man going to be able to provide for you? I think that was a main concern that my dad had, I think. But as far as like my personal happiness, it's just not a consideration in that theology. Your happiness does not matter. In fact, your happiness is your enemy. And we have to rely on, again, what the Bible says, or what the elder says of the church, which is your worth is having children, and that's the only, and the sooner you start, the better.
Yeah. Also, I mean, this sounds like what I'm familiar with purity culture, where, you know, there's father-daughter dances, etc. And the message is very ancient. Like back in the day, in biblical times, women were literal property of their fathers. It just was actually a legal truth that a woman was owned by her father. And then he would pass that ownership on to her husband when the father and him made a deal or whatever. And back then you could just pray and hope your dad gave a remote care for your own happiness, but not every father did. And women were less than second-class citizens, so it didn't even matter. So now we're looking at this in this modern era where, again, it's presented as this flowery, beautiful thing. Like, I'm protecting my daughter's purity. I want her to be safe. And I am like committed to taking care of her and protecting her until I give her over to the next person that owns her, and he now can protect her. So like, did you have any betrothment moment or father-daughter dance moment or anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. I will say really quick that the person who's best qualified to protect and look out for you is you, and because you know yourself, and no one is qualified more than you as a person to be in touch with what you need in life. And I would just say that just to begin with. Yeah, so we had a ceremony when the son turned 13. All the men in the fellowship would get together and basically say, you become a man now. They would give him written statements. My brother received a sword, anyway, and so my dad presented that to him. For me, it was, and my siblings of the same gender, we received a purity ring, and it was a ceremony that we were pledging sexual purity to our dad until he gave us away to someone else. And I just want to say, like, with this whole group, with this whole theology, there is a very, very, very weird bent towards fathers being sexually over their daughters, and it's very weird. And you can watch documentaries about purity culture and the whole Vision Forum, you know, Doug Phillips, the ATI community. There are multiple stories of these older fathers either abusing their young daughters or abusing other young daughters, because it's a fetish. It's a fetish for men to, you know, be in the ultimate place of power over a woman, even if she's young, even if she doesn't even understand what sex is. And so, yeah, I had a purity ceremony where I pledged to my dad at 13 to save myself from marriage. He gave me a ring, and yeah, that definitely happened.
Yeah. I would love for you to tell me in which direction you'd like to go. Like, I think one thing that's probably important is to talk about the public facade versus the reality, and what kind of public facade is being presented. I haven't shared this with you yet. I found this very disturbing looking at your dad's blog. Your given name by your family is Savoury, so this is about you. Your dad writes in his blog, "She was quiet as a mouse, suddenly appearing before my chair. I looked up to see her looking deeply into my eyes with her penetrating, intuitive gaze. She wasn't smiling or frowning, just looking at me, looking through me, looking into my soul. Then in the sweetest little girl voice, this side of heaven, my 7-year-old Savoury said, quote, 'Daddy, teach me while my heart is tender.'" Is that something you would have said? Is this an interaction that would have occurred? Like, what's the basis of this story?
I have a pretty clear memory. I don't remember that happening. I think that's creepy.
Yeah, I found it so creepy, just to clarify for anyone listening, because like I said, Stelle and I have been on a very, very careful journey together for 2 weeks, including one of her best friends has sat in a few conversations with us just to lend support, and she was also a part of the community. She is privy to exactly what is happening, and she often was there just to clarify, like, no, Stelle, you're not crazy. I was there. I saw this happen, you know, like, because I know that they can make you feel so crazy, like to read stories that never happened. Like, you told me that you don't have one fond memory of your childhood.
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
And I hope I'm not like leading or anything. I'm just trying to yeah.
Again, I see things or maybe experience things simplistically. I don't know how you're supposed to be fond of someone who you're not safe around. I did not view my dad as my dad wasn't a protector. He wasn't a safe person. Usually if he was interacting with me, he was upset or inflicting pain. So I definitely kind of just closed off to that, and, you know, was more in touch with my mom. And everyone survives dynamics differently. I do remember him, like, one memory I have was, you know, like, we played in the snow with, like, another family was over, and that was an okay memory. But yeah, I don't remember I don't have any clear memories of my dad reading to me, of my dad going for walks with me, of my dad comforting me. I'm not saying that those things didn't happen necessarily. Like, I'm sure my dad read a story at some point, but in my brain, which, you know, everything was not okay and was not safe, and from a very young age. So
yeah, I think what's coming to my mind is that these two things can't exist simultaneously. Like, you can't be walking on eggshells, terrified that you're going to, quote, sin in this very, like, subjective way of whatever might set your father off. And I'm speaking from experience too. My dad threw me across the room one time because I spilled milk on the floor. This is why corporal punishment's a problem, because it's such a slippery slope. First of all, it's a problem outright because you shouldn't. Fear is the antithesis of God. The opposite of love is not hate, it's fear. The concept of instilling fear into your child, to me, is outright satanic, wrong, point blank. But beyond that, like, let's say you could have a really concise list of these are the things you're actually worth getting hit on. Like, that's just not what's happening. It's not like, oh, you'll get hit if you sneak out of the house. You'll get hit if you get caught drinking alcohol or if you have sex with your boyfriend. No, it's like you'll get hit if you spill milk across the floor because daddy is in a bad mood. And when your dad has that countenance, when he comes home from work and you know you could get thrown across the floor for being innocent, for doing something that was a full and total accident, for being insecure, like your dad says, then how could you have a date? How could you, date with your father? Because dad talks about dating his daughter, which is creepy on its own too. But how could you remember fondly being read a story if you could do one little thing wrong by mistake and get punished for it in such a severe way? Like, they just can't exist simultaneously. You can't feel beloved and cherish these moments and these memories and also be terrified all the time.
Well, I will say as far as like my own experience and treatment was, which I'm only speaking for myself, but obviously there was other people in our family, but it wasn't, I was never thrown across the floor in terms of like, it was very, very specifically systematic. The abuse was it was carried out in a way that, you would see maybe in The Handmaid's Tale or something like that. There was never, the only thing I think my dad had control over was how he inflicted pain. And that was the moment he was in the most control. It was never like messy, if that makes sense. It was always like, you've crossed this imaginary line, you've dropped a jar on the floor or something like that, or you've misplaced something, and now I'm going to inflict what I am going to inflict. So I never got the sense that my dad lost his temper and just had an uncontrolled fit of rage. It was in that moment, it was always systematic. I just want to say that as far as my own experience.
No, yeah, that's interesting.
And often he would, he always had us subjugated when he was inflicting punishment. We were very rarely ever standing. He would make us lie face down on the carpet. Sometimes he'd make us wait there for 40 minutes, 30 minutes while he did other stuff. So we just lay there and think about it until he came and did what he did. But yeah, I think it was a very controlled behavior.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, which is also, I can't like pathologize what's going on at all, but that does align with what I've read of Debbie and Mike Pearl's book, where it's like, you're not sinning as a man by inflicting pain as long as it is systemic. It's like, it's thought out. They talk about the piping you described and the measurement. So it's like, everything is in order. It's this big, you hit them this many times, it has to hurt this bad. And then it pretends as there's some semblance of structure so things won't get out of control. But it just automatically lends itself to things just being out of control from the get-go.
Yeah, I don't know how well, again, it's really hard for me to talk about this, so I don't know how well I'm explaining it, but I don't want to give the impression that it was in control in that I only was hit 3 times, because the actual physical punishment was out of control. It was over the top, out of control, beyond. But the preparation for the punishment was controlled, is what I'm trying to say. There was never a messy beginning. It was very clear as far as, I'm going to dominate you, I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to do it in my own timing.
Let's talk about something that I find even the more difficult element of it, which is the mother who stands idly by. Is that something you mind talking about?
Yeah, it's not something that I understand. So I don't know what I can lend to that discussion.
Well, you know what we can talk about? Your dad's treatment of your mom. Did he ever hit your mom? Was she subjugated in this violent way?
No, and that just created a very weird reality where my mom was treated very well. And so anything my dad did to the kids was, you know, we couldn't go to mom and explain to her or say things because, and I definitely did a couple times, and she just would not see it. But yeah, she knew what was happening. I mean, you know, screams are hard to cover up, so she could hear. But I remember specifically one time, one of my brothers was going to get in trouble, and all three girls were at different ends of the house upstairs, and they live in quite a large house. And we all heard his crying. And all of us, without talking to each other, came running downstairs hysterical. Like, and this doesn't happen in our house, like, but all of us like lost it individually from different parts of the house. We came running downstairs and started yelling at my dad, or not yelling, but just crying and screaming at my dad, because we knew what was going to happen. We, like an animal would, instinctually recognize that cry. We knew exactly what was going to happen. We knew it was an injustice. And my mom came running out from the back bedroom and yelled at us girls to be quiet until we shut up. And then we all just had to go upstairs and try not to listen. So yeah, she knew. And that again, that was a one-off experience, but I will never forget the element of instinct that kicked in. And we were never allowed to challenge my dad, ever. No infraction was ever, not a look, not a word, not a tone of voice, ever tolerated, ever. And so for us to be in different parts of the house, to not talk to each other or confer with each other, to hear that cry and just the instinct that was so overwhelming of like, we have to put a stop to this. This is like, we have to. And then to have my mom come running out and yell at us and be like, you know, it was just, yeah, I mean, that's evil.
I know you're making me cry. That's so wrong. Sorry. It's just so hard, like, thinking about this stuff, as, you know, I have a similar memory of this happening to my brother, and it's a very distinct sound, like you said, and it's not right. And you can sense it from a million miles away. And the fact that you are all standing up regardless of what could happen to you in the aftermath in the name of protecting your brother, you know, that's power. That's being a mother, what you and your sisters did. So how do we address what is the presentation? Your parents have just released these 2 books on 100 ways to love your son, 100 ways to love your daughter. How can we hear this conversation and then also have access to these writings? And how are they even related? How does this make sense?
I don't think it doesn't make sense to me. I don't pretend to understand it. I have not read, I was not told that they were writing these books. I have not read these books. I have no interest in reading them. For me, it's personally very triggering to read their blogs and to read their writings and have such a different experience than what they're talking about. But I don't think you need 100 ways. You know, maybe just a couple ways, like don't hate children.
Yeah.
And protect them and celebrate them for who they are. And that's about it. It doesn't have to be 100. I was not consulted in writing those books. I was not asked if there was anything that was needed to be apologized for or to change or to review them. I think that might have happened with other siblings. Again, I haven't talked to them about it, but yeah, it's quite crazy to me that is now out in the world. So yeah.
Well, you're so brilliant. I've been in this whole process with my partner too. Like, I've had my own moments of rage, and obviously it's personal to me, and maybe you being whoever could doubt this story because it is so intimate to my life as well. But it's, you know, my partner, for example, called me out on loving all people. He was like, I don't want to say brand because that makes it sound like it's not real, but he was basically like, your whole persona, what you give off is what he authentically knows to be me, which is loving, forgiving, compassionate. And he was like, you can't pick and choose who you're giving this compassion and love to. These people, as hard and difficult and dark as it is, are worthy of that same compassion that you claim to give people. And I believe that is what Christianity is all about in reality. It's not about all these rules and regulations and hierarchy and subjugation and all of these dark inverses and perversions of the Bible that this group and community is promoting. But I've been so stunned by your words and your gentleness with this whole subject matter as well. So to round up this conversation, I know we got into a lot of different elements, and like I said at the top, I was very concerned about so many different elements. Like, what does it mean to call out people that I don't know firsthand? What does it mean to sift through assumption and what I read and my own interpretation of things and how they have hurt me versus what is actually currently hurting people in these worlds? And Stelle, her friend that also helped us walk through this, and a couple other people that defected from that community or had things to say firsthand, really, I don't want to say emboldened, but actually just encouraged me to believe / know that the right thing to do would be to come out with this. And I do also acknowledge that biblically it says, come to people first one-on-one to call them out. If they don't listen, like bring one other person or two other people to call them out. And then if they don't listen, you blow up their spot. And a part of me in prayer was asking, like, God, am I not skipping 2 steps by blowing up the spot? But in reality, my first video, I do believe, was an invitation to start some sort of dialogue, to have some sort of humility or compassion or understanding being seen in Dale. And his response to my video was to put out a video about internet haters and how every time he gets attacked, it's just confirmation that he's doing the right thing by God. And also, I know that he doesn't value my voice. And none of the men value my voice in this circle. And then thereby, none of the women might value my voice in this circle because they're subservient to these men. So the hierarchy and the system that was created is just plainly not conducive to me coming directly and having an earnest talk. That said, I'm not trying to justify anything. Stelle and I worked ad nauseum, hours and hours together to make sure that we prioritized giving as much love to everyone involved as possible, giving grace, not excuses, but grace. And this is an opportunity to look. Biblically, it just says all things done in darkness will be brought to light. For me, our intention and what I intended to do was not to ruin anyone's life or humiliate anyone, but to bring the darkness into the light and say, look at this. Just look at it. And objectively, in my video to accompany this, I haven't made it yet, but my plan is to show you articles, show you the words of these people. And Stelle, you and I talked too about how the main problem is this isn't just some weird little community that's kind of insular, that's doing their own thing, that's being abusive, whether it be physical or not. We're not accusing the whole of the community of being physical, although we are openly saying, yes, your dad did teach corporal punishment and tell other people that they had to do so, or they were being disobedient to God. I mean, I don't even know if I'm babbling now, but I think it's just so important for everyone to know that we did put so much tender love and care into our approach in this. And this was the best path we saw because these people's voices are loud and they're proud and they're growing and their Instagrams are growing, and her parents, the Jacobsons' books are selling. and they're selling a lie. And we're just telling you they're selling a lie. I don't know. What are other thoughts you have, babe?
Yeah, I think it's unfair to say there's a one right way to approach this kind of subject because it is so complex. And I will say that we individually and the other people involved gave it the absolute best shot. And I would just appreciate people listening to like hold a grace for that, and that there's no real simple way to ever talk about something like this. I'm very aware, I'm hyper aware of that group. I grew up with them. I know all these people personally. I'm definitely not obviously fabricating any of the things I was saying or embellishing them for any purpose, because I know that it just wouldn't make logical sense because of how connected that group is. And I will say that I was asked, not pressured, but I was asked in different ways and different, on different platforms from Brenda as she's putting together this story or this truth. And I was very hesitant. I had a very hard time with it. It was very difficult for me. And I don't need anyone to believe that, because I can see someone coming to this and maybe imagining that I am stronger than I am, or that I just have it easier than they can picture. But it's not easy. It's not easy for Brenda to read these things. But the reason we did it is because it's really, really not easy for the people who still are suffering under this kind of theology and authoritative structure. I personally did it for the wives and daughters and young sons of these people who will have years, if they ever are free of it, but years of just heartache and trying to rework their whole concept of themselves and life and love. And I just want to give life the best chance that it can. And so that's why I did this. It's not for any other reason. I am certainly not getting anything out of this. I do not take joy in this. But it is real. This group is so widespread. And I had mentioned that to Brenda in the beginning when we first started talking, which I even was not willing to, very hesitant. Even the first conversation that we had, I wasn't sure about it. But this group is widespread, and it's not, like Brenda was saying, it is not a tiny fraction of a hidden community somewhere in rural Oregon. It's spreading, and it's popular, and it has consequences. And I just wanted to come on here and say, like, I am a real person. I'm flesh and blood, and I am standing up and saying this is harm, this is evil, and there are real consequences to this kind of teaching and belief and theology. So that's why I have spoken up.
And now that you have all been introduced to Stelle, this is why I'm doing it as well. Like, listen to that woman's power, everything that she's had to overcome just to be remotely comfortable in her own skin. And, I've said it before that the word Satan translates literally into the divider. And we're supposed to be looking at the fruit. The division, not only in people's bodies and souls and minds, is so apparent, but also you can lose your family in the end. Being so alienated and alienating, these people. And if any of you all are listening, I truly do love you, and I truly do want the best for you and your families. I'm just standing up to say I'm a purity culture survivor. I don't have a chip on my shoulder because I'm mad at somebody. Like, it's not like that. It's caused me over a decade of pain, over a decade of trauma, of trying to realign my sexuality, my spirituality, my sense of God, whether or not he loves me, whether or not I'm going to go to hell for just being the woman that I am. And it's taken me into my 30s to actually find a true man that stands up for me, that has my back. He's been supporting me through this entire thing, and he, to me, has been an example. Men, if you're listening, There's a path to be the man that you've always dreamt of being, someone powerful. And that is my partner. You could take a nod from him. Power is lifting up your children and your wives in their own power, in never minimizing them and never telling them that who they're inherently made to be, including sexual orientation, is anything that's flawed in them. You are meant to cultivate their gifts. And by the way, don't anyone go accusing me of not being willing to discipline. I will absolutely discipline my son. I believe in respect and the authority that I have as a parent, but it's not going to look like fear. It's going to look like love, true love. And I'm really calling all of you to embrace that love. And Matt and Lisa, if you're listening, we just pulled your stuff out of the closet and I want you to look at it. We love you all. Thank you so much for being in this conversation. Stelle is open to continuing this conversation, so we don't know what's going to happen from here, but we will still be standing together in alignment with her best friend that has her back, in alignment with the God is Great community. Anyone that's willing up to stand for us and have our backs, you are welcome. We need as much support as we can get. And it's not about trolling and attacking these people. It's about encouraging them to embrace true love and true Christianity, which is love, not fear. And we love you all. God bless.